Thank you all for joining us for the final webinar in our series, What I Brought Home and Left Behind. We'll be starting in just a minute. Thank you all for joining us. We're just going to give it one more minute before we begin. If you'd like, please join our newsletter by going to singsingprisonmuseum.org. Thank you so much. Thank you all for joining us. Now, a word from the museum's Assistant Director, Amy Hufnagel.
Welcome. Thank you so much for making time this evening for the webinar series titled Carceral Conversations, What I Brought Home and Left Behind. Formerly incarcerated people share stories and memories and personal collections. My name is Amy Hufnagel, and I'm the Assistant Director at the Sing Sing Prison Museum, and we're slated to open in 2025. Together with my colleagues, we are presenting the 6th and final episode of our series this evening. And I must admit to feeling a bit sad and nostalgic about losing the stream of conversations that have been really exciting for the last 6 months, one a month. And if you missed these conversations, we encourage you to visit the Sing Sing Prison Museum YouTube channel, where all of the programs live, and you can watch this series or a range of other programs there. We also have been launching on our social media a really interesting oral history excerpt program. Those live on our YouTube channel as well, but you can also check in on Instagram or Facebook to find that content. I also want to just do a quick shout out for our next program slated for April 18th. It's a Thursday evening. It will be an in-person program at the Ossining Public Library in Ossining, and it's part of National Poetry Month. More information will be on our calendar and in our e-blasts next week, but we wanted to tell you first this evening. Of course, we think word of mouth is a really powerful media tool. So if we can get you to share news of our events, that's always preferred. So tonight, your comments and your questions are really important to us as well. So want to make sure that you know that we wanted you to take time to communicate and be in conversation with us tonight, and also to fill out the survey that we're going to send at the end of the program. Our funders like to hear from you much more than they like to hear from us about what's impactful. So if you can take a moment with that survey, we'd really appreciate it. So as we start, we'd just like to start with some basic terms of engagement and some information about the museum in general. First, let's just outline what's going to be the flow of the event this evening. You're going to be hearing from the Prison Museum's collection manager about how objects from Sing Sing factor into the museum's development and how we're starting to think about objects. And then you will hear from our special speaker this evening, Terrence Coffie, who will be in conversation with our communications coordinator, Robert Rose. And then, of course, a discussion that follows with your Q&A after. Second, we'd like to make a point about addressing language. At the Sing Sing Prison Museum, we use people language, so we don't talk about inmates or convicts or felons. We talk about currently or formerly incarcerated people, returning citizens, people who have been recently released, and justice-impacted individuals, which is anyone who's been impacted by the justice system. We don't expect everyone to know this or follow this, but we always like to start our presentations this way because it's one of part of the things that we can learn together this evening. Third is the terms of engagement. We just really want you to be part of our work fostering open and inclusive and educational dialogue about incarceration and history and material culture. And we really do welcome your participation. Who is the Sing Sing Prison Museum? We are an independent nonprofit organization led by a deeply dedicated board of trustees and a very small staff. And we are creating a museum in Austin, New York, whose mission is to share stories of incarceration and reform, past and present, and bring people together to imagine and create a more just society. We're working on many capital projects right now, including facilities both inside Sing Sing Correctional Facility and outside in downtown Austin. And we're excited by lots of new programming that is on the horizon for 2024. You know, at the Sing Sing Prison Museum, we want to really focus on this idea about how we think about objects. And we decided to bring people together to tell us about these objects that they had inside and left behind and brought home with them as a way to think about the meaning and memories and different kinds of value that gets attached to objects in the carceral system. And how does the value of an object change over time? So tonight we are all learning along with you around these issues and what it means to remember one's experience of things. While we're going in about physical things, we also know that there's a lot of collecting and shedding of experiences and ideas and feelings and skills and habits that are also part of this narrative and that stay with us as well. I want to say thank you so much to Terrence and to all of our presenters who are being so generous with their experiences throughout this series. We know it's a hard place to revisit, and we really appreciate you remembering publicly to help us understand. So let's turn to Sing Sing Prison Museum's, let's turn to the museum's collection and programs manager, my colleague, Nicole Hamilton. One reason I'm so grateful to work with Nicole is that she is committed to making sure we are not contributing to systemic injustice or inducing traumas in the interpretation of our carceral objects. Nicole thinks deeply about how collections work can better serve communities, including developing more inclusive policies that account for the needs of marginalized groups. She frequently presents on prison museums and collection concerns and is currently serving on the leadership team of the Association of Carceral Sites and Museums. She will begin this program by sharing something already in our collection or how we're thinking about our collection as we explore this topic of material culture together. Nicole, thanks so much for your help.
Amy, thank you so much for that final introduction. Again, I'm Nicole. I'm the Programs and Collections Manager for the Sing Sing Prison Museum. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I want to thank you all for being here. Just give me one moment to set up my screen. All right. So last month, I shared a piece of ephemera, a theater program, one of many that the museum has in its collection. And before that, we looked at the prison industry's catalog, a piece of sheet music composed by the bandmaster at Sing Sing Prison, calligraphy from one of the many classes in Sing Sing Prison's history, and our very first object, the Babe Ruth baseball from an exhibition game against the Mutual Welfare League. And a theme has emerged. These all show the permeability of Sing Sing. It was nicknamed the Castle on the Hudson and compared to the Bastille. When Sing Sing opened in 1828, it was designed to isolate the people incarcerated there, both from the outside and from each other. Although the incarcerated men worked side by side in the stone quarry, there was a strict code of silence, and they moved in lockstep to and from rows of solitary cells. Even today, Sing Sing feels like an impenetrable fortress. But as we've explored in this series, objects move in and out of the facility, and I want us to look at one more thing that has come out of the facility. A postcard with the message, "I am leaving here today for good. Your father told me you went to the office last night. A." This postcard was sent December 14th, 1907 to a Miss H.G. Thompson in Connecticut. And that's about all we know. The message implies the person sending it was incarcerated, but we really don't know for sure. And there's no name, it's simply signed A. And again, for who it's addressed to, we don't have a whole lot to go on. And we have to ask ourselves, who is sending a postcard like this? Is someone who's incarcerated at Sing Sing in 1907 really buying a souvenir postcard of the prison? But even though we have all these questions, what we can say is that Sing Sing Prison, as much as it tried to be a castle on the Hudson, as much as it tried to remove the incarcerated men from society, was permeable. Letters came in and out. And there were theater productions and a music program, calligraphy classes, and baseball games. And even the goods produced at Sing Sing went across New York State to public schools and hospitals. And this is why it is so important that we understand this history. The carceral system isn't isolated. Many of the facilities may be rural, but their impact can be felt everywhere. And the Sing Sing Prison Museum is here to share this history, both through objects, through programming like this, and through our online exhibit and so many different venues. And by sharing this history, we want to bring people together to imagine and create a more just society. And as an institution, we really believe that you need to understand where we've been to understand where we should be going. So with that, I want to thank you all again for joining us. It has been a pleasure to share pieces from the collection. And now I'd like to hand this off to my colleague, Robert Rose. He's the museum's communications coordinator and a researcher with a focus on dismantling the prison industrial complex and working towards improving the lives of people currently incarcerated. Robert has contributed to numerous reports with organizations, including Worth Rises and the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. Robert?
Yes, welcome to another insightful session hosted by the Sing Sing Prison Museum. My name is Robert. We are delighted to be here with you all tonight. Today, we delve into a unique story of resilience, reflection, and unexpected navigating tools within the confines of prison life. We are joined by Terrence Coffie, who carried with him through his journey of incarceration something seemingly mundane, yet profoundly significant. A book, through Terrence's eyes, will explore the dimensions of time, self-determination, and the human capacity to seek peace amongst chaos. Terrence is an NYU Silver School of Social Work alumni, has transformed his life from a cycle of incarceration to a beacon of advocacy and education and criminal justice reform. As an adjunct professor, Terrence founded the Social Justice Network, host of its Coffee Time on the Social Justice Network. Terrence's journey reflects a profound resilience and commitment to change. His accolades include the National Association of Social Works, NYC Alex Rosen Student of the Year, and an NYU President's Service Award, showcasing his leadership in reentry education and juvenile justice reform. a voice for the voiceless. Terrence's work includes contributions to academic publications, documentaries, champions of solutions for those closest to the system's challenges. All right, I'm going to say good evening and welcome to our last and final webinar in this series of What We Brought Home. Today, we're joined by Terrence Coffie, whose journey from incarceration to advocacy illuminates the power of education and reform. I could begin by asking Terrence, just tell us a few things about yourself.
Well, Robert, I want to first say I'm super excited and delighted to be here. I'm equally excited surrounding the work that's taking place with the Sing Sing Prison Museum as we began to think about reimagining justice, reimagining the carceral system, and what roles do we play as a society to effectuate that change to reach the ideal state. I think you said enough. I hear these accolades and a lot of this about my career, and sometimes I still wonder who are they talking about. Again, my name is Professor Terrence Coffie. I'm an adjunct assistant professor at New York University. I'm also faculty for our New York University Prison Education Program, where I now teach at Wallkill Correctional Institution. And I'm also a formerly incarcerated citizen who spent over 19 years in incarceration. And it was through education that my life began to take on a very different direction and meaning, which is founded in a lot of my work today in my belief that those closest to the problem are also those that are closest to the solution. I think you mentioned I'm a published author, a co-author in several publications, also op-ed writer, and published articles with USA Today, Forbes Magazine, Wall Street Journal. We can go down the list. But more importantly, I like to see myself as a beacon of hope, as you say, to not only those who are incarcerated, that their lives can change, but also as it relates to policymakers and how do we invest into the carceral system in an effort to reach the ideal of what we're hoping to achieve as a society.
Thank you. That was a lot.
That's the short version.
No, I'm glad. It's always good to know what people are doing and why they're doing it. And you made it very clear. That's important to everyone.
Yes.
And I know in your introduction, we talked about a book that you thought was provoking in your life. Could you tell us something about that book and what was the significance in you bringing it home?
Yeah, well, that book, I keep it with me. It's actually one of my required readings for my students, and it's James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time. And this was written years ago, and the significance actually was birthed out of, as I mentioned, I spent over 19 years of incarcerated cycling through our criminal legal system, and it wasn't until my last incarceration that I had the distinct honor and privilege of meeting a man by the name of, I never knew his real name, so forgive me, Chin. He was what we referred to in my days as an OG, original gangster. He was also an individual that was doing a 30 to 60 year bid. And I think that what's important for me to share about Chin and who he was and who I was, that he was the individual that I wanted to be. I didn't think about the 30 plus, 30, 60 years that he was doing. He who was what I wanted to be. And we had what we call work assignments while in prison. And it was Chin. And I used to come in today, we used to get the newspapers, and I would come in with my newspaper and I'll be reading, talking about stuff and, hey, this is going on, et cetera, because I was always compelled to read because of my mother. And one day when I came in with my young antics talking about what was going on in the news, Chin looked at me with that look and said to me, "You need to get your young ass in school." And he wasn't saying it, he wasn't saying, how when a mother tells you something, she's not asking you, she's telling you what you're going to do. And because of my respect for Chin, because of my admiration of him, I remember going to Mr. Sanders at the educational program, the end of that day. And a week later, I was in an educational program in which I started my academic journey. And it was there that I ran across this book, The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. And what made it so impactful in my life, and I've read this book, I have to tell you, probably 100 times since 14, 15 years ago, because in this book, Baldwin he explained the complexities of the society in which I live. But the most important thing that Baldwin did in this book is that he was able to explain me. He talked about an eternalization of belief that we take on what society says about us. And over the course of that time, I began to see myself as an individual who had adopted all these belief systems, that I could only be this, that I was only that I could only, you're Black, you live in the hood, you ain't gonna never. And you know, they had their words at that time. In our time, we had a new word said, I'm a thug. And that's all I saw myself as. And when you begin to internalize and see yourself in that capacity, what happens is that you limit yourself to that belief system on what you can and you cannot do. And that that became the beginning for me. And I think that secondly, I think it's important, as you see behind me, the second, I would have to say the most important thing that transpired in my life that really influenced me was in November of 2008 when Barack Obama was elected president. It was the first time, and I think for all of us as a country, it wasn't just moving as a country to see our first African American elected president, as a people, as a Black people, but I think as a society, and it was representative of what we could be and where we possibly could go and what we could become, and the yes, I can. And on that night, I remember the guards let us sit up to look at the elections. I don't know if they let us sit up because they thought it was, you know, whatever that was. But they allowed us to sit up. And I remember one specific aspect of that night. There was, you know, the camera was going all through the crowd, but the cameraman went directly to this older Black woman. And she was crying. And when I saw her, she reminded me of my grandmother. My mama. And I think that it's important that I say that, and the reason all this was happening at the same time is because, again, there was an internalization that I believed about myself and what I believed about society of what we could and could not achieve as a people or an individual. And this was the same storyline, I believe, for Barack Obama and our country as to what we could and could not achieve. And when that transpired, it became a very, very pivotal and amazing point in my life. And I do have to say, it was also the last time I was incarcerated, which, you know, from there, I went on to pursue my academic career, in which I graduated at the top of my class at New York University, earned my master's, and went later on to become a professor there. And in each one of these settings that I have an opportunity to do this, I always like to say that I have to pay homage to that gentleman named Chin, because once I got out of that boiler room and got an education, I never saw him again. And I've done a lot of interviews with Katie Couric. I've been on all kind of spaces. And most people do ask me what individuals have influenced my life, who have, helped shape me. And I must give, I must acknowledge the Dr. Lindsays of the world at NYU. I must acknowledge Dr. Hawkins. I must acknowledge Dr. Kirk James. And these were men who represented the best of what I could be within the academia community. However, I cannot mention none of those names without mentioning the one gentleman that started this, that allowed me to see that I could be more than just a prisoner, and that individual is Chin. So I'll stop there. I know it's a long version, but I think it's important that we understand the makeup of how these impacts play a role in our lives, and how we play a role in ensuring that we're shaping our carceral spaces to inspire change.
Yeah. I know when we met earlier, I talked about Baldwin, and I said, you know what, I read his books early on, and I had to go back and read them again because it meant something different. And when the first time I read Fire Next Time, I didn't get it all. But then the second time, it reminded me, like you said, it reminds you of your mama, your grandmama, and the civil rights and human rights. You know, I didn't live through that. I grew up here upstate New York. It was a little different in New York City than it was in the South. I know that. And I know the book always told me about race, power, and identity. And what you mentioned, what Chin said, we're not going to let anybody define who you are. And those are the things that I got from Ball when I read it. And now I'm thinking about the work that you do today with advocacy. How do you put those two things together, what James Baldwin talked about or wrote about in the 60s, and how that impacts us here in 2024 when we look at the carceral system in the United States and New York?
Well, ironic as it may seem, the system within itself really has not changed that much. Outwardly, appearances are one thing. However, we can go back to 1994 when we think about the Clinton administration, and during that time, then Senator Joe Biden was an individual that stood on the floor of Congress and advocated for the passage of something called the 94 crime bill. Now, before we get there, I think it's important that the same way Baldwin in the 60s was discussing this idea of who we are as a people, what this represents, we have to also understand that prior to the 94 crime bill, there was a narrative that told these communities, these poor Black and brown communities, as to who they were. Hillary Clinton probably said the famous quote of all time that lives today: super predators. Then Senator Biden referred to them as a pack of dogs running the streets. And we have to remember that when we talk about systemic discrimination and systemic oppression within our and through the space of our carceral system, these messages were being internalized by the very communities, and I'm a part of that. We were all, that same discriminatory practices that was taking place during the 60s, it continued even until today. So I'm not the message. My mama used to always tell me, "There ain't nothing new under the sun." And I can go back to after the slavery, when we talk about after Emancipation Proclamation, when the narrative was then set forth by a documentary called The Birth of a Nation, which described African Americans as these animals that were going to come and kill. So those narratives continue to shape the policies that govern the systems in which we live. So my message is only a continuation of the work that those who have came before us have already set forward. I always tell my students that this is a new era. That new era also is inclusive of when we think about some of the policies that are being set forth today with the immigrant population. When you start labeling a people and not seeing the humanity of the people, it's much easier for us to kind of set forth these draconian and abusive policies where we miss the humanity of those that we serve. So my message today is, it's a continuation as I speak on various public platforms, as I speak into Wallkill Correctional Institutions with those men and women in the communities I serve. You'll see that this is still relevant, that communities feel that they have no space to succeed in a society. You have men who are incarcerated who feel that they're coming home to a society in which there are no opportunities. When we talk about discrimination in employment, housing, voting, education, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that messaging, no matter what it looks like on the outside, when we look at the systemic practices, they are still relevant, they are still prevalent. And again, this is why I'm so committed to supporting this work here at the Sing Sing Prison Museum, to ensure that as we begin to rewrite these narratives, that we are writing them from a humane perspective that helps promote the equity and equality within our society.
Wow, that makes sense. I just look at I see it as like concentric circles from what Chen did for you and got you moving in the right direction, to you getting Baldwin, to bringing Baldwin home with you and giving it to the students over at NYU and allowing them to take it out. So I just look at these little ripples keep coming out from one person looking at you saying, hey, I want to see something better in you. And that is reaching all the way out here in the community today. I know he probably wouldn't have understood that something as little as telling you to move forward with your life can have that big of an impact and reach students out here in New York City in 2024.
Well, let me say this. I didn't even think it's gonna ripple that far. Like I said, Robert, there are days I still have an opportunity. I have to pinch myself. There are days in the advocacy and the work that I do today at New York University, as well as at NYU PEP, where I find that my life, it comes full circle. I can't tell you how amazing, and most people are trying to run to get out of the prison, and once they leave, and I'm running to get back into prison, but also to be able to share this work of Baldwin and its relevance to today's society with those future leaders within our society at New York University is equally inspiring.
Wonderful. And this is something that you brought home. What did you leave behind and why?
Well, let me say this. One of the first things, I was talking with my wife, and she asked me about what we leave behind. We had a belief system. Don't bring nothing home with you because it's going to give you bad luck. So the things that I did leave behind, in all seriousness, you would get radios, you would get clothes, you would get sweaters, you would have your commissary and things of that nature. And because while I was in the education program, I would also meet young men who were just coming into the prison system. So when I got, because I was a TA within the educational program at Gainesville, what I did do was able to find some of those individuals who did probably have as much as I did. And I gave those things away for that reason. And I think my rationale, particularly for the younger ones, was the idea of, if they have this stuff, it would move some of the, the barriers of stress for them to get involved in something else. You know what I'm saying? Because, in prison, you can sell weed, you can do this, you can do all that to try to get those things. And since I had those things, I was able to give those things to some of those young men who were part of that education program to help them. And I want to say, outside of the book that I brought home, the two other things that I brought home with me was I earned my GED. So once I received that, I took that home and I gave that to my mother, who passed away in 2018. She also has my master's degree. So just to make that clear, and the other things that I brought home with me were the letters that I received from my family, because those letters reminded me of my humanity in spite of the environment I was in. Those letters reminded me that I was loved. Those letters reminded me that I had a family. Those letters reminded me that there was a tomorrow, because when you're in a carceral space, day in and day out, it can become very hopeless. So those things became very, very personal to me, and those were some of the other things that I brought home with me.
I know here in when you say Gainesville is located in the South, right?
Yes,
Right.
in the deep South, as we say.
I know you talk about book, and you're reading a James Baldwin's book in the Deep South, which is, you're wondering, would they allow such a book in the South? And then I want to know is what was the process of people getting books there at Gainesville?
Well, for in Gainesville, or it really, it's not just Gainesville, it's the Florida Department of Corrections or Georgia, anywhere in the South. Those books are usually in the libraries, sometimes hard to find. But this particular book was actually given to me by Mr. Sanders for me to read whatever, and he was the educational director. So whatever he saw in me, I'm grateful for. And once I began to read this, it was the life changer for me. And the reason I say that, I believe that you can change anything you want in society, but if you don't change the mindset of a person can't see themselves in a different light, I sometimes think that some things are self-defeating. But this piece of work, again, and I can't reiterate this enough, how much it shaped not only the views about myself, but also the views of how I see society, and the structures and the systems in which we all live within the society, and explaining race, explaining systemic racism, and seeing how that systemic racism shapes the policies that we live under. So that's why it became such a powerful piece of literature for me in my life and the work that I do today.
Wow. Because I know like it's good that they had a library available. I know like here in New York, you have a library, but sometimes it's very difficult to get books or to get books of something worth reading. So I know it's always important. Like you say, people could just, whittle away to nothing while they're inside. And it's always good to
And I think that this is why, we have been very, even now, my work with the Social Justice Network, we launched the Comic Books for Justice initiative right here in New York with the New York Public Library, in partnership with the New York Public Library jails and prisons program. And that is my, in an effort to promote literacy within correctional institutions. I think that when we think about this conversation that we have, particularly when it comes to libraries and books and reading, a lot of what we're seeing that's happening in the southern region of our country attests to how this is under attack when we decide that we want to ban books. And let me say, and I don't want to just isolate the South. Let me, please don't make that mistake. I don't want to isolate the South as with these practices. I think the South is just a bit more open and forthcoming about it as opposed to the North, but we still see the same outcomes when we think about recidivism rates. And for any of our listeners here, the recidivism rate is when, from when a person is released until when they go back into prison. And one of the great things that we have been looking at is that we have a 77% rate, recidivism rate here in the United States. And that number is just that number. But when we look at the lack of programs within correctional institutions, when we look at funding being cut to correctional institutions that support a person's reentry, when that type of investment is not there, what we will continue to receive is those dismal outcomes. So in this work, again, I'm dedicated to ensuring that not only the narrative of the individuals and communities that we all represent and are seeking to serve are shared in a way that speaks to the needs, speaks to the future, and speaks to the integrity and the moral compass of us as a society. I think Brian Stevenson, if I'm not mistaken, shared that no one individual is their worst mistake. And I think that it's important that for us as a society that we construct our systems in our society in that way that provides the opportunity for those individuals to move forward.
When you mentioned Brian Stevens, that no one's one mistake defines who they are, do you still feel the trauma of being defined by that one instance where you may have been taken to prison?
And I listen, let me say this. In my work today, the prison system is an extension of the same poverty-stricken communities that people lived in. The trauma that trauma was already there based upon the environments in which people lived. I think that our carceral system or our prison only compounds that trauma. I think this is why, if when I have these conversations, we understand that 67% of the people who enter our criminal legal system have some form of trauma or mental health issue. 82% of those have compounded issues when released from prison. So what that tells us as a society is that I think it's critically important, if we understand this research and data, that it's very important that we begin to invest in mental health treatment while individuals are incarcerated. And the preventative measure is an approach of investment in communities that are disproportionately harmed by over-policing, poverty, et cetera, and we really take a deeper dive into investing in those communities and providing opportunities for mental health services.
Mm. I hear that cycle that you're talking about, and I guess that was the very cycle Malcolm X spoke about, talking about poor neighborhoods. When you live there, you get poor teachers, poor students, and then in the end, you get poor jobs. So that's something that Malcolm X spoke about in his writings when you read it. Just
exactly.
And so you see
and
something.
I like to refer to that, and I didn't mean to cut you off, Robert, but I like to, and I think when we have these conversations, it's critically important that we understand what I refer to in some of my research at NYU is when we talk about the ecosystem of poverty. And the ecosystem starts out this way. You're in a poor neighborhood with poor service, with poor this. This is why you have higher rates of mental health, substance use disorders, and we can go down the list of things. Individuals who start out from this space of poverty usually end up in one of our systems, whether it's homelessness, whether it's mental health wards, whether it's whatever that be. From there, because homelessness is criminalized, mental health is criminalized, poverty is criminalized, crime is criminalized, since we have to take that in consideration, because if you're taken in poverty, and then these people end up in our criminal legal system. We leave them in our criminal legal system, they're released, and when they come back from that criminal legal system, remember, we have discriminatory policies around housing, education, employment, and we can go down the list. And if we're not providing opportunities and resources to those individuals within those communities, they're only going to come back out into the same conditions or even worse, because now those are compounded and they go into this other system, which then leads back to either homelessness, the same poverty-stricken community, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then they end up being reincarcerated, which accounts for the recidivism rate, which then continues that cycle within the ecosystem.
One of the listeners or participants asked about your advocacy work, and is it just here in New York, or do you reach out to other states, and how? Could you just explain that for her?
Yeah, my mom always say advocate starts at home, but however, I've worked on several policies here in New York State, such as the ban the box legislation, which made it illegal for employers here in New York City to discriminate against those who have criminal backgrounds. I have been a staunch advocate of bail reform. I have been a staunch advocate of a host of other things, but I also need to also share that my work is also national. I have a love-hate relationship with the Biden-Harris administration in regards to some of the policies that have been shaped at the federal level. And the reason being, let me say this, and I hate to be so nuanced with these things, but I think it's important as listeners have an opportunity to be in this space, that we're very clear on how we got here. And the first thing I want to say, the reason why my work is really focused at the federal level, and two of the pieces of legislation that I am supporting is Senator Elizabeth Warren's repeal the '94 crime bill, and also Cory Booker's I think it's the Smart Sentencing Act. Because here in the United States, so we're all clear, our federal prison system only accounts for 250,000 people. However, those '94 crime bill policies were adopted by states, which gave us what we now know as mass incarceration, which is 2.2 million people here in the United States. And by that, by states adopting those policies, there was an expansion of our criminal legal system, which gave us what we now know as mass incarceration. I don't mean to sound repetitive. However, so my work is at the local, state, and federal level. I try not to separate those two. Even if I'm talking about something at a local level, I'm always tying it to a state or federal law, because a lot of these things, again, are adopted at the state levels by from the federal level. So it's important that when we have these conversations, we're not talking in silos of just New York or Texas or Florida, any of that, because I think it was Dr. King that says injustice everywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So my belief is this: we can pick the apples off the tree all we want, and we know it's going to continue to produce all these bad apples, or we can chop down the tree. And for me right now in our time, a lot of the work that's being done through Sing Sing Prison Museum, a lot of work that's being done even in Alabama with the Equal Justice Initiative that's led by Brian Stevenson, the work that's being done in California, et cetera, et cetera. All these have roots to the '94 crime bill. So this is why I'm a big proponent of repealing the '94 crime bill. Yes, I deal with local and state issues. However, I think that it's equally important that we have a vested interest in reshaping some of the policies at the national level that influence what's happening at state levels.
Thank you. I know the '94 crime bill still has people in prison today, and it definitely had a dramatic effect on prisons throughout, because it took away a lot of the educational programs,
Exactly.
college, and so on. And I know people just don't know how bad the bill is, and the amount of time people have to serve as a result of it. So I know it's something that we should look into in the future, in future webinars.
Yeah, and I think that, the most important thing I was sharing with my students earlier are, we all have these narratives that we hear. If we ask any of our participants here tonight, when we think about the narrative that we hear surrounding the immigrant crisis, what we'll hear is, oh, they're rapists, there's murder. That's a narrative. That's what someone has told us about this population. And again, that's nothing new. But when a person's views can shape policy, that's a very different story, because that policy affects the lives of people, communities, and families. So again, in my work, I'm just committed to ensuring that the laws and the policies that govern our society are based in from a humane lens, from a humane perspective that we all believe to speak to the best of who we are as a society, and also to recognize the potential of so many men and women who are incarcerated within our criminal legal system, but who never just yet had the opportunities. And that's where my advocacy for the Pell Grant, which is the national work that's being done to provide funding for those to pursue educational opportunities, and also here in New York, where I supported the TAP, the tuition assistance program here in New York, that would provide men and women who are incarcerated an opportunity to access higher educational opportunities.
And tell us, all right, I know you have an organization that you work with, the Social Justice Network. Can you tell the people how they can get in contact with you there, and get more information, how they can even join you and help you with your mission?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Robert. Yeah, the Social Justice Network, you can actually find us at sjnus.org. You can learn more about our work, which, right now, I think I mentioned earlier, we're leading a statewide campaign to get to promote literacy here in New York City. Also, you can follow us. We have our Connection series, the Social Justice Network Broadcast Connection series, which is in partnership with the New York Public Library. And also, lastly, we have our 3 programs, the Reentry Assistance Program, the Family Assistance Program, and the Reentry Educational Program. And again, you can follow us at sjnus.org. There should be, this is where I let all my other my team, they do this stuff. You can definitely set a calendar invite to, to speak with me, to speak with our team, to share more about the work that we're doing here in New York as well as in Washington.
Wow. Wow. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You provided a lot of insightful information and gave us a starting point for our next webinar series. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today and taking time out to participate with us. And remind you all that on April 18th, we're going to have an event at the Austin Public Library. So please sign up for the Sing Sing Prison newsletter by going to the website and stay in touch. We'll get in touch with you with more information. And we have one last question I wanted to make sure I got out before we left. Was what do you know of any organizations in Florida where people could reach out to? Someone asked that question.
Yes. I'm not right off the top of my head, but whoever it is, if they can get in contact you, we have I think it's the Florida, I can't say I want to try to do that. I'm too old to do that. But there's the Florida group that we work closely with that are doing a lot of work down there that I can definitely put your guest in contact with. I look forward to hopefully meeting them. Also, can I give my email address, Robert? Is that okay?
Yes, you can give it. No problem.
Okay, for anyone who's listening, I can also be reached at tcoffie, TCOFFIE at SJUNS.org.
Great. Again, we'd like to thank you for being here, Terrence, and taking time out to tell your story and sharing with us. And also, we would like to thank all the people that joined us tonight and ask that they please sign up for our newsletter. And with that,
Rob, tell her it's SJNUS. It's the other way around. I think whoever put it in, they probably got it back at SJNUS.org.
Okay, we'll get it in. All right. Again, I'd like to thank everyone for being here. And they could reach us at info@Sing Sing Prison Museum, and we will answer any questions you have and get back to you. Again, thank you for being here. And that concludes our webinar tonight. Thank you all for being with us.